Hello listeners and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series with the WetWired podcast. For more on the WetWired podcast, you can follow the links in the episode description. But for now, here are Sean and Jules in conversation with Casey from the Cult Vault podcast. Yeah, I think that's the difficulties with understanding online spaces and how individuals can become radicalized in certain ways or enter somewhat dangerous or unconventional spaces. Because if you have some kind of interest or if you have questions to some strange subject, or if you have maybe a really unheard of kink of some type, there is a space that exists now for you to find the answers or the community that will allow you to feel accepted, as you've said, Jules. And then with the community stuff that you mentioned, Sean, if you finally found a place where you could speak openly or where people could give you the answers to all of these questions you've had, if something small happens that you don't necessarily agree with, can you forego really thinking about that and wondering how it really sits with you? Or do you walk away from that community? And once that line is crossed, there is often a continuance of things that happen and bigger things that happen and bigger things that happen. And not always the line is crossed. Sometimes individuals aren't given access to information that they would need to make a critical decision by design a lot of the time, with groups like Shinchunji that are very kind of cloak and dagger about their recruitment tactics. But what we see with a lot of online spaces are things like Pizzagate, where you go from talking about something to somebody actually going to a restaurant to look for kids in a basement where there is no basement in that restaurant. And so sometimes you see this turn into offline harm, which is what a lot of the worries are in the cult awareness space at the moment. And interestingly, Sean, you mentioned John Atack earlier, and I'm going to be meeting with him in a couple of weeks to do another recording for his YouTube channel, where we are going to be specifically focusing on the difficulties of online spaces and things like the Jordan Peterson effect. And I know that you've done an episode on where are the real men? And I saw that title of that episode and I was like, oh no, I can't, I don't know if I can speak to Jules and Sean if that, and then I realized that it was, not actually how you thought about the subject.
So my sort of tongue-in-cheek episode titling has come to has bit us a couple of times. We've managed to receive some following and some attention from people who think that we're actually encouraging these topics or we're in favor of them, and then getting
a surprising number of crypto bros
getting incredibly disappointed and vocal sometimes with us in direct messages about how sad they are that we've let down this cause.
Yeah, I think you always want to be careful and do due diligence on individuals that you speak with and share your stories with. If I was to go on to a podcast and find out that the individuals I was speaking with were anti-LGBT, for example, that's not a podcast that I want to be associated with in any way.
Yeah,
because it's completely in conflict with my own ideals and beliefs and the mission statement that I have for my podcast. So I saw the title of that episode and I was like, and then I listened to the episode and realized that it was kind of clickbaity. So kudos for that.
Oh, I don't know what's worse, is that we're actually like Josh Hawley followers, or we're just clickbaiting.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, about 4 years ago, my partner would drive to work when he had a longer commute, and he would listen to Jordan Peterson, and he would come home and he would say, I've been listening to this person. He's a really interesting speaker. He has some really interesting things to say that I agree with. But occasionally he says things that I don't agree with, and it feels very culty. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, I think that Jordan Peterson has the potential to be a cult leader. And he was like, let me tell you his story. And then let me show you some clips. And now, of course, we're in full blown kind of post potentially mental health issues, Jordan Peterson, where the individuals like my partner who can kind of latch on to a few of the ideals about, you know, the man's role in the house, not in a misogynistic way, but in a taking responsibility for yourself kind of way. Like, you are in this family, you have a role in this family. It's not necessarily to overrule the family, but it is to play an active part. I think all of us can agree that idealistically that sounds okay. But it's kind of like when you read the core like tenets of Dianetics, and you're like, oh, on a basic life principle, that doesn't sound too bad. But then the more you get into it, and the more twisted and skewed and coercive it gets, the more the sunk cost fallacy plays in, and the more people are like, well, I've been a follower of Jordan Peterson for 2 or 3 years now, so even though we're talking about horrific stuff to do with Elliot Page, I'm still going to agree with everything that Jordan Peterson says because I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years. So the Jordan Peterson effect is something that I'll be talking about with John in a couple of weeks, but an interesting crossover between the work that you've been doing on your show.
Yeah, that is fascinating stuff, because I first encountered Peterson quite a few years ago when he was very, I don't know, he was not very widely known at the time. And he was fresh out of the encounter he had with his students at the university. And I think he was in
Toronto,
Ontario,
I think, right?
At the time. Okay, in Toronto. And
I don't know for sure, but I think it was Toronto.
And it was all of this sort of, this backlash of support, basically, sort of like, the tide rolling back out, and realizing, that he had all of these people that were interested in also having a predisposed bias toward, the students of a university age who were interested in having a different type of structure to their education. And then there he was, he found himself, like boosted up by Joe Rogan, and with his own with his own growing platform. And fast forward a few years, and we see him partnered up on the Daily Wire. And it's been quite a road for this guy, of course, with the side trail that led through being a guest of Viktor Orban's in Hungary, and going through benzo withdrawals, and then the carnivore diet, and now he has his daughter Michaela as this sort of health and wellness influencer, and oh boy,
and that's a whole other industry
with the religious twist on top of it as well, because I've heard from people that have watched the big arena talks that Peterson does occasionally, will proselytize basically about how people need to come to Jesus and be born again. So you have all of these talks about, and now we have the horrific, really anti-trans commentary, just the disgusting rhetoric that makes my skin crawl, quite honestly, right through to, and so to get over this, we need to believe in the Lord and Savior. And it's just weird because there's a lot of things that are coming together, and it feels like the overall mission is to generate Christians in Jordan Peterson's idea
in his image. I mean, somebody who has almost no familiarity with either the history of Christianity or their texts, but yet at the same time, he's approaching it as if there isn't all of this thousands of years of already filled in stories. He's approaching it as if he just has this idea of Jesus and he's going to reinvent it now.
Yeah. But it's really just a Sunday school understanding.
Exactly. Yeah. That's actually not that dissimilar from the way a lot of cult leaders operate, is that they reinvent it, they reinterpret things, and based on their own particular picadillos. And that's really what Peterson has done.
And it started really just getting some book sales with only tossing out a few handfuls of horrendous things that he's saying here and there, to today being totally unhinged and mask off about the whole thing. But it is that mechanism or that process of doing the bait and switch. First, we start with make your bed, and then we move on to genocide. Like it.
Yeah, but it's a very slow process, like with Dianetics, and like with the Church of Scientology. And again, it's like if I pepper in a few problematic comments, how much of it is going to be accepted in the broader sense of my teachings and my proselytizing? Because if I can get away with a few of these comments thrown in, eventually I can build on that until we get to where we are today, and a mass following of individuals who identify with people like Andrew Tate, and just all the things that are wrong in the world, in my opinion.
I think we've done 2 episodes on Tate.
As a woman.
Yeah, we've actually talked about Andrew Tate twice on our show. Once just in general terms, and then after he got arrested. The Dianetics thing, that was I think probably one of the more subversive actions of any religious group that, or cult, or whatever particular terminology we'd like to use as a label, that I can think of, and at least in modern times, mainly in terms of how effective it was. I think I remember those commercials when I was a kid advertising that book.
Wow.
And there'd be this volcano erupting in the background, which I now know was, which was where all the Thetans are. And, but it's this animation of this volcano erupting, beautiful, like very, like Hollywood cinematics, from end to end, the entire commercial. I mean, it basically plays like a, what's his name? The Roland Emmerich, the director who makes all the disaster films like 2012 and stuff like that. And then this booming voice and talking about all the in very general terms, problems that people face and the things that are hard to understand about life. And then it just flashes the book up there, this sort of airport paperback book on screen.
Yeah.
And then I remember seeing it at the grocery store. I remember seeing it places there. I remember thinking like, oh, that's the book with the commercial. And,
Yeah,
and
that's how it works.
I was, I don't know, maybe 10 years old at the time. And and I just can't imagine how many people that particular tactic worked on.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, Sean, because going back to John Atack and the book that you've just ordered, Opening Our Minds, which is an amazing read, there's a section in the book about advertising and how advertising, where it came from, how it's changed over the years, and how it influences us today in terms of devices listening to us, personalized ads, which is something that is very kind of new in the last 5 to 10 years. And the idea that all of us are being influenced in some way continuously by what we digest, what we see, what we walk past, what we speak about with people in an everyday conversation, whether we realize it or not, which is kind of an existential, scary thing to consider. How do I not be influenced? The answer is you always will be in one way or another. I think I'm having to kind of come to terms with that. But Dianetics, again, not the first, not Scientology, not the first company, business, religion, cult to use this tactic, but it's being used now by so many. Just to go back to Liana Shanti, will have things on the website that says, are you struggling with and this is not exact, but examples that you can find on websites like this. Are you struggling with anxiety, depression, weight loss, can't find a job, making connections with people, getting a promotion at work, and basically there's a whole list of things that all of us would look at and say, yes, I would like help with one of those things, or it would be nice to have information on how to tackle one of those things. And it's the hook. It's one of the things that gets you in. And what is really tough about breaking free of that is things like star signs. You go to the part in a magazine or a newspaper and you're like, wow, that sounds exactly like what I'm going through in my life right now, like, by design. Like, and then you get all the way back through to New Age. Yeah, exactly. Then you get back through to New Age spirituality and all of the difficult things that come with that part of the world.
When fortune cookies were good and they would say things like, you're going to meet someone new and interesting in the near future. Oh, I did meet somebody new and interesting.
Exactly.
It worked.
Yeah. I'm going back to that restaurant because they just know.
They have the best fortune cookies.
Now it's generic life advice. I want a prediction.
And those questions you mentioned about, do you have anxiety? Are you having trouble in your relationship or something like that? They all boil down to just asking, who among you readers of this post are actually humans? Because this is something that is shared by and has been shared by all humans since humans existed. For the past 300,000 years, we have experienced these exact problems. We've had trouble in relationships. We've been worried about something. We've had problems. There's always, I mean, as soon as you can imagine what the future might be like, or compare your situation to somebody else's, you realize that there's something that's not the same. I want something that this other person has, or I used to have something I no longer have. And then this creates all of our issues. And if you get somebody who talks about that, then somebody who says, I can solve this.
Charismatically as well, in a way that makes you think like that there's no way they couldn't do those things. It groups are very good at, especially new age groups and online communities are very good at asking those questions, Sean, and identifying those vulnerabilities in people, but also, as I like to say, throwing so much shit at the wall to see what sticks. In terms of, we have some teachings about Christ, but we also have some teachings about star signs, and we also like to go for walks in the wilderness and experience equine therapy with horses. And it's just kind of like, and these websites are colorful and wild, and there's so much stuff happening, and all of us could go onto one of these wild websites and be like, wow, this really speaks to me, because everybody is just seeing what they can throw and that will stick. And it's quite scary.
It's
really
a carnival with something new behind every door, whichever door you pick.
Exactly that.
And there really is something that has the potential to resonate with just about everyone. If you've ever read or been inspired by some quote that was attributed to the Buddha, we have something from the Buddha here. Or if you've ever read any Chinese philosophy, we have some Lao Tzu over here, some quote from something he wrote. And if you ever thought about one of the Sermon on the Mount from Jesus, we have a little bit of that too. And and they just keep they have this sort of this supremely syncretic idea that we're going to gather all of these threads together, and there'll be something in here for everybody. And
you're so right, Sean. That's it. You two have been doing a lot of work and have a very good understanding of this subject. It seems. We are all poor man's versions of cult experts.
We are, yes. Oh,
my brain has melted long ago from listening to these people and reading them.
and I think that's where the one of the things I think one of I guess this is going to inadvertently segue into me toward a question that I wanted to ask you, but one of the things that seems to be at play here is like regarding adults, who are encountering this messaging. This doesn't apply to children who are raised in environments, but when adults encounter these messaging, I think that one thing that seems to be a commonality is that while I still think it's true that everybody experiences these anxieties and worries and these particular problems that are supposedly going to be solved with, listening to the tapes or moving to a compound or something like that, that the people who seem to really be a good fit for these groups or the intended recipients for the messages are people who think that other people don't share these problems, that I tend to have, I'm in a worse situation, or I'm somehow singular in the issues that I have, and that other people don't encounter these same things. And so they somehow have concluded that they're not as good, or they need something extra, or they want something that's going to find something that's going to make them feel as good as they think other people feel. And
right.
I was wondering, and all the people you've spoken with and the material you've come across, whether it's going to be ex-members or people who are themselves maybe a richer version of a cult expert than we are, then have you come across any common themes when it comes to like how adults encounter these groups or how adults become attracted to them?
Absolutely. I think that one of the first things to consider with this particular subject is social conditioning on how people don't talk about their true thoughts and feelings, and how a lot of individuals are taught not to, well, not apart from narcissists, and this is how narcissists are able to prey on people. Don't express yourself. Don't talk about your feelings. Everybody, someone somewhere has it worse than you do. I think there's a lot of not just thought terminating cliches, not just a lot of apathy in society, but a lot of social conditioning that comes with not expressing yourself, and then feeling like nobody wants to hear you. You won't be heard, even if you do decide to take those brave steps in opening up to people about struggles that you have and issues that you're facing, and what comes at a time of vulnerability and typically transition is that a big target is placed on your back. Narcissists and perpetrators and cult recruiters and abusers will notice those vulnerabilities in you and prey on them at your most vulnerable. If you are a person that is empathetic, if you are a person that is helpful, who wants to make a positive change in the world, who is somebody that wants to please people and help people, if you are somebody that is intelligent, these are all things that are preyed on by individuals that are trying to abuse others, much to the surprise of the general public, who think that individuals that join cults must not have any type of intelligence or critical thinking. It's quite the opposite. Misconceptions around that, as you've probably come across, are really difficult to change, but that is a necessary change to happen for people to protect themselves and arm themselves against these groups. If a person tells me that they could never be pulled into a coercive group, I believe that that person is probably more likely to be pulled into a coercive group, because all of us are susceptible to these tactics. It's human nature to be in a communal environment, and that in its inherency makes us all vulnerable. But the difficult thing about a transitional period, like losing a loved one or a divorce, or your child leaves for university, or you leave for university, if you are in a situation that is unfamiliar, that leaves you vulnerable, that places you in a position where you might be a bit lost, where your critical thinking might not be working as highly as usual, if you come across an individual at that moment, that is the most dangerous position in life, in terms of being recruited or pulled into one of these groups. And I try not to use words like joins a cult or becomes a part of a cult. It's more like
there's less volition than that.
It's not a choice. You're led to believe that it's a decision that you're making, right, but it's not a decision that you're making. It's all to do with suggestion and susceptibility at times where we are vulnerable. And it's really, really hard to come from a position of not being in one of these cultic environments or experiencing a coercive relationship and understanding that. And I'm still trying to practice that every day when people who have QAnon adjacent or conspiratorial thoughts jump onto my YouTube channel to leave comments, or people in certain groups that are talked about on the Cult Vault podcast come into the comments to defend the group that they're a part of. I still have to take a step back and remember all of the things that this person has been subjected to that has led them to come to my YouTube channel to defend the abusive group that they are a part of, telling me that it's the best thing that's ever happened to them in their lives. And at one point it may have been, but it does not stay that way. It's utopian and idyllic to begin with for a reason. It never stays that way. And that's why it's a cult. People say, are there any good cults? There are no good cults, because the definition of a cult is that it's something that's not good for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, even the good cults, whatever you would call, however you would come up with that, a list that would fall under that title, are still going to have the same level of manipulation and control, or else the group wouldn't be there. Otherwise, it's just a club that you go to sometimes. And
yep, and you can leave, and it's fine.
You can,
and then it's not a cult.
Exactly, but like that actually brings up, like some.
Well,
of the,
I mean, try to get out of LinkedIn.
Ways.
That one has got to be a cult.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine some book club that's just meets once a month, but try missing a couple of meetings and see how they react. And if it's not a cult, then everybody will be happy to see you when you return.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and it's some of the same influences that we're seeing in advertising, like we were saying before. Side effects of using this cult may include abandoning your friends and family, moving to a compound somewhere in Montana. I mean, it's a lot of the same influences that we're subjected to from all sorts of other sources in our lives.
Yeah, I think about the bias you were talking about that people tend to have, who have sort of just maybe their only connection to the inner workings of a cult is reading a journalistic piece or something like that. And some of those can be very responsible, and many of them are not. Many of them are deliberately inflammatory, so that so that the people are going to read the articles, and you have more advertising clicks and whatever. But the people who have that level of contact and that level of experience, you have the same mentality that people have, that advertising doesn't work on me. I'm not susceptible to it. I can watch dishwasher soap commercials all day long, and it won't influence which one I buy, or for anything else. But yet they manage to have a brand new pair of basketball sneakers, and that looks that's like the thing that some star has been wearing. Or they have the new album that came out from the pop star, and then they have all these other things that tell you that they are very much part of this culture, and they are just as influenced as everybody else.
It's Roy in IT Crowd when he says, "Oh, I'm not susceptible to any of that." Anyway, new Kook, the soda.
I love that you watch the IT Crowd. That's good. That's so good.
I think we've both seen it through a few times.
What is interesting about what you've said there, Sean, about journalistic approaches and media, is something that has been on my mind for a long while. I'm not sure if you see any of my YouTube stuff, but I did a video on I think it was a Daily Mail online article that just, oh gosh, it enraged me in some ways, because ahead of the recent Netflix documentary on the raid at Waco, a lot of people that write for certain newspapers and online magazines were given early access to this documentary to write some promotional pieces ahead of the release of the documentary. And I think it was in the Daily Mail Online, and I apologize to the Daily Mail Online if it wasn't. Oh no, it was the Daily Star. It was the Daily Star. They wrote the headline was something like, husband allows cult leader to bonk his wife. New Netflix documentary coming on the Branch Davidians. So I was just like, okay, I'm just going to ignore that article for a little while. And then I watched the documentary, and it's only partway through episode 2 of 3 episodes that the documentary addresses David Koresh and who he was and where he came from, without much information, and then even less information on the environment that Koresh cultivated inside that compound. And it kind of went from David Koresh joined, he was charismatic, he became a leader, and then he started sleeping with everyone's wives. And there's a section with a man that says, and he said he wanted to sleep with my wife, so of course I let him. But there's no context in the documentary on how did we get to that. And that's what I try to do on the Cult Vault podcast, is approach the whole subject. Like, people focus on NXIVM, on the women being branded. And then I speak to Susan Dones, who was one of the original members of NXIVM, who talks about being financially coerced out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there's like the cult, and then there's the inner cult of NXIVM. Every person that was working on the inside, in the inner workings of NXIVM, was being abused and coerced in some way. And the media focuses on the stuff that is most shocking to people. But what it doesn't do a lot of the time is explain to individuals who are taking in this media or trying to learn about it, is how do we get to the point where women are being branded? How do we get to the point where husbands are giving permission, in air quotes, for their wives, or for David Koresh to sleep with their wives? And what the Daily Star does is bolster that sensationalism and stops us asking questions on how do we get there. It's more like, oh my goodness, I would never do that. Oh, I'm so shocked by this. I'll go watch the documentary so I can pass judgment. Pre-judgment being, I would never let that happen. And so it goes round and round and round in circles. What I found recently with Hulu's documentary on the Larry Ray cult, Stolen Youth, was so well done. It was so compassionate. It focused on the stories of the survivors. And then you have newspapers and articles, Hulu's sex cult documentary, and that dismisses every survivor's story. They were subjected to horrific treatment of every abusive nature, and all the newspapers, for the most part, are focusing on is the sex cult, which is just dismissive of people's experiences, and it really silos that group into people thinking, oh, people were chained up and used for sexual exploitation, which isn't what happened. Physically, psychologically, it was part of what happened, but it wasn't the whole thing. And what Stolen Youth does is it brings us that whole narrative. It allows us to understand the entire thing with a bird's eye view. And then newspapers take that and they just focus on one part, the sensationalized part. And it's obviously, I'm on my soapbox. It's very frustrating.
I was just going to say, it becomes a caricature of reality that so distorts it that we can't understand it, especially as you mentioned earlier, how we can often dismiss people for being too stupid, or they lack critical thinking skills, and that's why they're joining these sorts of things or recruited to these things, and that completely turns them into these two-dimensional beings instead of being humans with agency of some kind that are finding themselves in these situations. And this totally dastardly villain twirling the mustache with the tied up woman on the railroad tracks interpretation of how these cult leaders work totally makes it so that we can't ever see the kind of mechanisms that are being used on us in the daily that might even find ourselves into these sorts of things.
Exactly that. And I do feel like it's changing for the most part, and ethical content creation is something that is becoming more of a discussion. But when you talk about things like agency and then you use the term sex kind of implies consent, rape doesn't. And so if you're using the term sex cult, there's already some type of subconscious understanding that, perhaps this was a consensual arrangement before it wasn't, or perhaps it was always consensual. So it's very tricky to use that type of terminology, because not only is it diminishing to the survivors, and not only is it foregoing everything else that happened in that environment, but it's also kind of misleading, because the coercive methods used before any sexual exploitation took place allows us to understand through the Stolen Youth documentary that it was never consensual.
Yeah, so much of this, the lines seem to, I mean, in groups like this, the lines between what is consent and what is not consent seem to blur, because there's the words floating around there, of agreement as part of how these rituals have to work to keep these groups cohesive.
Yeah.
But just because the words are floating around there doesn't mean that there is real consent or real agreement, especially when you have no real other choice. It's like the person reading from the hostage paper, and off screen the gun is being pointed at them by the hostage taker, and they're saying this is totally consensual. My own free will. That's what I'm doing here into the video camera.
Yep. What happens to you? You say the word yes, but what happens if you say no? So it can it ever be consensual in that situation? You're not going to be allowed to have food for a week if you upset the hierarchy or the leader or the system. Or you are unethical, as Nexium would say. You've been unethical, which results in alienation. So being ethical is saying yes to Keith Raniere. Is that still consent? Because I don't know that it can be. So this is again another thing that is kind of wrong with some journalistic approaches. To be fair to the author of the article, he did reach out to me on Twitter, and he did say that he realizes that the terminology in the article is wrong. He apologized for it, not publicly, but he did say that he does not have a final say on what is published and how it's published. So the problem again is at the top. I do remember speaking to John Atack once, and he said to me, if in 5 or 10 years' time you can look back on your work and be happy with what you've produced and know that you don't have any regrets and you haven't sold your values and you haven't sold your morals, you will be in a good place. I don't know that you could write for the Daily Star and say that after 5 to 10 years if you were a thoroughly decent person, that you had not sold out your values or your morals by contributing to that type of publication.
I had a very similar encounter, and you just touched on some of the early reasons why Jules and I started putting this whole project together in the first place, is that we kept coming across all of this information about QAnon that was obviously just the most superficial treatment. And there was a whether it was going to be journalistic or some of the other shows that were around, that were not really making much of an obvious effort at all to address how people ended up under the influence of these ideas in the first place. And even not in a coercive scenario, because especially with QAnon, that there isn't really sort of a central hierarchy. There are some core influencers that have their own personal followings, but there isn't like, dispatches from Q as outside of those original Q drops. And there's nobody to really follow. But yet this was attractive to people, and it drew people in. And so what I have tried to do is try to understand what must it be like in the head of somebody who is attracted to this. How does that resonate with an individual? It doesn't resonate with me. But I can try to imagine, if it were to resonate, then what else do I need to be thinking about? How do I see the world? And I about a year maybe into doing this show, I had an interaction with a journalist who had published what I considered to be an incredibly irresponsible article. I think it was about Negative 48, actually, when they had first gathered together in Dallas waiting for JFK to return. And which is yeah. I have the same reaction. And it was just such a flippant treatment of addressing all the people that had gathered there without really any consideration for those people as individuals, what their families were experiencing, really anything. And I was vocal about it in reply to this person's posting their own article on Twitter. It wasn't the response that you got where there was any kind of real acknowledgement. It was more like, well, what do you expect kind of reaction.
Yeah.
But that's really, that's been something that I think is really lacking out there is, and I don't really know how to remedy it other than to just get more people talking about it along these lines and wondering, like what else is going on? How does this work? And I find that there's, that not only makes people prone to the type of thinking that, is associated with QAnon and general conspiracism, but it also makes it hard to talk to those people because it creates this reactionary environment against them, where people don't want to ask further questions. I mean, you mentioned the word agency a moment ago, and what does that really mean in a circumstance where people are being coerced and manipulated? How much agency does an individual have? I think that is really an issue because, one, I don't think very many people have considered what it means to even have agency. And also, we're living in an environment where everybody is influenced all the time. And so how much agency do any of us have? And these are not questions that we tend to reflect upon at any point. And that makes it so that we're kind of in a free for all where all of this stuff can happen and many other things that we haven't even imagined yet.
And maybe Mercury is in Gatorade again.
I imagine not just the things that have occurred and trying to figure them out, but the thing that gives me pause sometimes is, so what horrors are we going to encounter in the future? Because we haven't worked this stuff out. What else are we going to be susceptible to? What political movements or, religious fascinations or whatever do we have just around the next bend because we haven't really sorted this out in our own heads yet?
Yeah. It's a really tough one. And the negative 48 situation is, I react that way because I recognize a group of people who have found a community that is led by an individual that is unfortunately either most likely not well or is profiting off of individuals who are vulnerable. So that is what kind of makes me put my head in my hands. I think the fact that you sit down and contemplate the positions individuals are in when they find familiarity or where they find connection with the types of groups that negative 48 leads, or the Queen of Canada, or whichever of these
I was going to mention there's a parallel with Romana Didelot and Michael Protzman. Yeah,
it's really tough, and I don't know how we hold journalists to any level of accountability. I don't know how we call for responsible journalism when journalists have been doing this since reporting began to exist, I imagine, and even now, if I type in cult news on Google, I will find the cult of the Democratic Party, the cult of the GOP,
I know.
The cult of the cult of Boris Johnson, and the cult of Nicola Sturgeon.
It's almost as bad when you
that word.
Yeah, it's almost as bad as when you search for. The word is
being used out of context.
Absolutely.
To further divide individuals from left and right and red and blue. It's siloing individuals because divide and conquer is the best way for people to be re-elected or elected. And journalists, it's a tactic that works, especially when some of the papers and some of the networks are in the pockets of people that want to divide and conquer. And that's a whole other conversation for like a whole other thing.
That's a whole other level of this.
I don't know. I don't know either, Sean, what the answer is to that. But I just hope that enough conversations take place that individuals that are identifying with certain communities and are kind of not buying into, but are finding something within certain communities and teachings, can hear the other side and still consider the other side of the argument. Oh gosh, there's just a whole thing with pro-trans and anti-trans online at the moment, and the extremism is almost the same on both sides. And people are saying, oh, no to this and yes to this, and we should dox people online, and we should show these horrific pictures, and but it's both sides of extremism using the same tactics. So I don't know that either party can be right in that sense. There has to be a way where you don't fight radicalization with radicalization, because then you become the thing that you're trying to fight, and that's how some cults are born. Some leading cult experts came from socio-political cults where they wanted to make a difference in the world, and the only way to do that was to become extremist in the groups that they existed in, before realizing that they were cult-like, and then spreading their knowledge with the world, which I am thankful for. So I really don't know. It's such an interesting but difficult subject to navigate, cults as a whole.
Yeah, and there's even the widespread media illiteracy that exists, where even the ability to discern between a good journalistic piece and something that is just absolute junk, or even yellow journalism or sensationalism, is just not even in the toolkit widely for a lot of folks.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll see people share the Onion articles and be like, I can't believe this is happening. And I still don't know if the person is being satirical when they tweet, or if they're being serious when they share the Onion article saying that they can't believe this is happening, when obviously the Onion is a satirical paper itself. So, yeah. Oh, I just don't know.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate sort of coming to the end of oneself, when it comes to considering these things, because there gets to be a point like, where can you go? I mean, we can know some things, like you said. I completely agree with the sentiment that there's no good outcome from fighting radicalism with radicalism. Like, I don't, in this sense, or using the term in the sense of an entrenched ideology that I'm refusing to budge from. That there's no sense in that. I mean, there's no way to have that turn out well, because even if you get the sort of the letter of the law that you want out of it, the intent behind it is one of just controlling from the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the question of what did we compromise to get the results that we wanted, and I don't know that if we, because I am, as I would hope most people are in the world, but unfortunately don't seem to be, is pro human rights and equal rights for people that are living within the law. I don't want to say free love for all, because we saw that with the children of God, and obviously there shouldn't be intergenerational sexual arrangements, again with air quotes. I want to see a world where, if a person wants to live away within the law as it stands now, they should be able to do that. I don't want to live in a world where we have to forego, again, our values to accomplish that. So of course I'm pro-trans, and I worry when I see the really extremist side of pro-trans urgently, desperately trying to hold on to the rights that we've managed to gain up to this point, and saying or doing certain things to combat the anti-trans horrible, horrific rhetoric coming from that part of the argument, and people trying to strip laws and take us back to the dark ages. I don't want to have individuals leave their values and abandon their morals in order to get what humans should have. So that's the difficult part of it. I just want to make sure that anybody listening understands that I'm not saying that we shouldn't be pro-trans, because we should be. We just have to do it the right way. We have to do it a way that is sustainable, a way that is lawful, and a way that isn't harmful to the people involved.
Quite relevant to that. I had to mute my mic for a second there because the Pride Parade is literally going by the street outside of my house right now. So I have a lot of background noise.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm in Liverpool, and they have the best celebrations here every year, and it's such a welcoming city for all marginalized community groups, and it's a wonderfully blended city, and that's why I'm still here.
You good, Jules?
Yeah. Are you good, Casey?
I'm good. I do have pizza here, so I am going to dash in a minute. If
Yeah.
that's okay.
Perfect.
That is perfect.
Well, let me go.
Yeah,
through it. You do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to thank you once again for joining us. It has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. It is. I knew it was going to be good, but it was even better than I had hoped.
It was so wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you both, Jules and Sean, for your time and for sitting down to talk about cults, coercive control, and to shoot the shit. Yeah. I appreciate you both.
Absolutely.
It was perfect. It is. It's exactly like how I like conversations to go.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up entirely, is there anything that you want to point people toward, or places that they can find where you want to be found online?
I am at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com if anyone wants to reach out and have a conversation. I am at cultvaultpod on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram, and the Cult Vault podcast is available on all podcast players, as most people's podcasts are.
Yeah, I've taken to just saying listen wherever.
Just listen.
Yeah, and you'll find it somewhere. I won't know that you listened to it, but you'll have listened to it. So it also looks like you have another live stream event coming up in July.
Do I? No more live streams.
No?
None planned right now. I did do one in July last year.
Oh, that was from last year. Okay.
So that might be.
That's what I saw in the menu.
If you've visited my website, I've got the page is still up with all of the guests' information from last year's 12-hour live stream. So I did one.
Yeah, sorry to cause that panic.
This month. I was like, oh gosh, not after YouTube banned me. Funnily enough, for doing videos about QAnon. So don't do that, because if any cults want to take you down, they're going to use that type of content to get you banned.
Oh boy. Jules, you have anything?
No, I think that was pretty good. I got to run outside and join this parade before it passes my house.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Take some photos and share them online.
I will.
That is the end of this mini-series with the WetWired podcast. To find more from Sean and Jules, you can follow the links in the episode description. And to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.